Hi, this is Eliza Inkberry with Gothic Gardening at Darkside University, and I am doing a student requested video on how to train vines. And the thing about vines is a lot of times what you're really wondering is how do you stop them from climbing as much as they're doing, because a lot of them are so adapted to climb that it's more difficult to get them to go where you want them to go. So it kind of depends on the type of vine you're growing. You have a few that are kind of they're vines in that they get long and lanky, and they'll be happy to lean on a support and get tall if that's available. But if you're not there to kind of lift them up it, then they just sprawl on the ground as a vine, and they tend to vine out on the ground and put down roots a lot of times, and that's what their sprawling adaptation is for, is to let them get really far away and put roots in a lot of places. Um, and then you have vines that are clearly intended to reach for the sky and get as much sun as they can. So what you want to do first is kind of identify what kind of vine you're going to be growing, and here's an article that has some options. And the other thing you're going to want to decide is how big a vine do you want, and we'll look at some different types of trellising systems and stuff. So maybe you're starting with a plant like, I know that I want to trellis miniature melons because I need to save space and I'd like to grow them upright instead of sprawling across the ground the way they want to grow, so that I can save space in my garden. So if you're starting with the plant and you know which plant you want, then you need to look up how big that plant's going to get, and whether or not it has tendrils or it's a twining kind of vine that wraps around something, or if it's got some other way of holding itself up or not. And if not, then we'll talk about how to do that. And if it's a small vine, if it's something that's not very big, then maybe a small clematis or something, then you're not going to need as much to get it to grow. Plants with aerial rootlets, and I actually don't recommend English ivy in my part of the country. I don't know as much about other parts of the U.S. Or the world, but in my area, English ivy is kind of I haven't really seen wildlife using it that much. I know that robins will eat the berries in the spring and spread them around, but it mostly kind of chokes out trees, and it doesn't seem to have a lot of food value for wildlife. So there's a lot of other vines that I think are better that don't spread as rampantly, and maybe I'm just prejudiced with it because I've been fighting against it for so long because it creeps in on all the edges of my property and I'm constantly removing it. But there are other plants with aerial roots. Roses are one. They do have thorns which can kind of attach to things a little bit, but they don't have any kind of tendrils or aerial roots or anything that's going to actually physically attach them to something. So that's something that you may need to sometimes you can just lean them on their support or kind of wrap them around it as they grow, and that will cause them to stay on it. And sometimes you need to use some sort of tie to hold them to it. Um, so you can use covered florist wire. You don't want to use the really thin wire that can kind of cut into the plant, but that's an option. And you could also use like your old pantyhose cut up, or socks, or just regular garden twine. You can use whatever you want. You don't have to use a specific thing. And so this is an example of a tendril. This is on a cucumber. Cucumbers are very easy to get to twine up things, and so if you really want to train it, what you're doing more than teaching it to climb is keeping it from climbing where you don't want it to. Because I find that my cucumbers will like lean forward and try to attach themselves to the plants in the nearby bed, and so I have to kind of gently untangle them and redirect them to the trellis. And I use wire trellises like this a lot. So you see where the tendrils wrapped around, and if you want to, if they already have that curly tendril, which they often do, you can very carefully wrap that around the thing you want them on, and it'll just stay, and it'll start to grow that way and continue to climb there. So that's a very easy one, and you do need to keep up with crops like this. A lot of the annual vegetables grow really fast, so if you're not going out there every day or every third day at the least, um, you're going to end up with plants growing where you don't want them to. So it's really more of a maintenance and staying on top of it thing than it is like a true skill. And then you have some like these have the aerial roots. They kind of look like gecko toes. This is Virginia creeper. And in this case, you don't really need to encourage it to climb. I mean, you can see this one's climbing up right here, but these are growing from the top down. So they're just kind of hanging down, and that's going to cover the wall without you having to do any kind of training. So if you have an option where you can plant it above a wall, then your training is kind of taken care of for you. But here's Virginia creeper again, and it has really nice fall color. I have heard that it can deteriorate the surfaces that it attaches to over time, so that's something to keep in mind, that things with aerial roots can actually damage structures. And you may not want it like on your house. But this is the way that it attaches to things, and you really don't need to do a lot other than clip it when it goes where you don't want to on things like Virginia creeper. On something like a tomato vine, though, the only way you're going to get that to climb up a wall is if you've got some sort of trellising system. And what they may have done here is driven some nails or some other support into the brick and then put ties against the stems of this to get it to train upward like that. Some other people like to train them on strings to go up a trellis where it'll have a wood frame at the top and then a string tied to it. And for that, you can just kind of wrap the tomato around the string as it grows, and it'll start to support itself that way. But with this, you're going to need some sort of trellis, or some sort of tie to hold it against a brick wall. And this is an example of a twining vine, beans and morning glories. There's a lot of different twining type vines, and what they do is the entire vine kind of acts as a tendril, and it wraps itself around the supports that it finds, and it'll wrap itself around whatever's there. So if you want to train it, then you're going to need to put it on the trellis that you want it on. This is a type of morning glory. It's a cypress vine, and there's a similar one called a cardinal vine that's got a broader leaf to it. And they're really nice ornamental plants. I don't love morning glories, but I do grow the cypress vine because the leaves are so fine that it doesn't end up smothering my plants as bad, because it just doesn't block as much light. With morning glories, I find that they just eat my garden. And so this one is crawling on its own up this door, probably not where they want it, since now it's going to be hard to open and close that door. So again, you're just trying to keep it from going where you don't want it to go. And here's another one, kind of like the tomato, where you really do need to drive nails or some sort of support in here, or have a support at the top that's holding it, because the roses are not going to have any kind of aerial roots to attach themselves to that flat surface. And this is a Banksia rose, and it's kind of staying up by gravity. Once it gets up to here, the structure itself will support its weight, and it just kind of leans on that, and it continues to grow and tangle itself through things until it's pretty caught up in there and isn't likely to fall. And this is a very heavy plant. That's something to keep in mind as well. You don't want to put a really heavy plant on a structure that can't support it, because it will crush it. And I'm not sure what's going on here. This kind of looks like bamboo, so I don't know why you would try to put bamboo in front of a trellis like this. But these kind of trellises put against a wall make it so that you don't have to do as much training like with florist wire for a plant, because or you at least don't have to drive nails into the wall itself, because the plant can be attached to that instead. Normally you would put some sort of vine here and it would crawl up this. And these kind of trellises, you may or may not actually want something climbing on them. They could just be out there to support the plants or to keep them from smothering other plants, kind of as a barrier. But you can kind of wind them up through trellises that are out in your garden. If you have something really ornate, especially something made by an artist, or something that you really love the look of, you want to pick a vine that is kind of small and isn't likely to just totally overwhelm the trellis, or you want to prune the vine often enough that it's just like a thin plant weaving through there, and you can still see the pattern of the trellis. You can make some handmade trellises. These are probably willow or something similar that you kind of weave together. Likewise for this, only it's a taller one. Um, these kind of arches are what I'm talking about a arch that's not very good at supporting weight. So like this would support, say, a cypress vine really well, but it's unlikely to support a muscadine grape or a hardy kiwi or something that's very heavy like hops. So certain vines really need a heavy duty trellis to hold them up because they're very big vines. Again, with this, you probably wouldn't want to plant, say, a Chinese wisteria on it or something that's going to totally smother it, or the other vines that I just mentioned. Or even if you look up the kind of climbing roses you're growing, some of the climbing roses get like 20 feet long or more, and the trunks on them can start to get thicker and thicker, almost like a tree, and eventually they will crush lightweight metal structures like this. And you'll come out one morning and it'll be collapsed. This is like a handmade Gothic arch. This would be a pretty strong one, depending on how wide this is, because I can't see at this angle. But the wider that is, the more structurally sound it is, because it's got more support. So the thinner it is, the more likely it is to topple over. And so you could probably, if it was wide enough, put something like a grape on here. This one looks pretty flimsy. I'd probably put something like cypress vine in it. The other thing about annual vines, like a cypress vine, is it's going to die back every year, so it never gets a really thick, heavy stem on it. This is a rose, and basically with climbing roses, you're just going to keep redirecting it to go up this, and then you're going to prune off the pieces that are sticking out on the underside so that they're not whacking people in the head when they walk through a path or something. And this is a very sturdy arbor. You could plant pretty much anything you wanted on that. You'd need to prune it if it was going to get bigger than that after a time, but it would support it. This is another nice sturdy one that you could plant pretty much what you wanted on. That one maybe, maybe not as far as how sturdy it is, but you could definitely plant a lot on it. And that's just a really ornamental one that, again, you might want to put something that doesn't totally overwhelm it. And that seems to be all of the images that I have. So I hope that this answers your questions about how to train a vine. And if not, please ask me more in the comments or in the discussion forums.